The room goes silent for a moment after someone asks a question nobody expected. Maybe it happens at a family dinner. Maybe during a late-night conversation with friends. Maybe it happens entirely inside your own head while staring at the ceiling at 3 in the morning. The question sounds simple at first, almost harmless. Then something strange happens. People become uncomfortable. The conversation changes direction. Someone changes the subject. Someone offers an explanation that sounds convincing for a few seconds until you realize it only leads to another question, then another, then another. Eventually, someone says something that feels familiar. It is one of those answers that seems to end the discussion without actually answering it. And in that moment, whether you are religious, skeptical, uncertain, spiritual, or completely undecided, you experience something deeply human. You discover the difference between having an answer and having a way to stop asking questions. That distinction is where this entire conversation begins. Because there is a question that quietly sits beneath thousands of debates, arguments, sermons, books, podcasts, conversations, and personal crises. It is not a question about religion alone. It is not even a question about belief. It is a question about certainty. And most people never notice how much of their emotional life depends on it. Imagine someone asks you why anything exists at all, not why this planet exists, not why human beings exist, not why your life unfolded the way it did, why existence itself exists, why there is something instead of nothing, why reality exists at all. The moment that question enters the room, something unusual happens. Every explanation seems to move the mystery one step backward without actually removing it. If the universe came from something, where did that something come from? If there was a cause, what caused the cause? If there was a beginning, what preceded the beginning? If there was no beginning, how can something be eternal? No matter which direction you move, the ground beneath certainty starts to crack. And this is where the psychological tension becomes impossible to ignore. Most people assume uncertainty is something they dislike because it prevents them from finding answers. But what if uncertainty is frightening for a deeper reason? What if uncertainty forces us to confront the possibility that reality itself may be stranger than our minds are comfortable accepting? Think about the moments in your life when certainty disappeared. The relationship you thought would last forever suddenly ended. The career you believed would define your future collapsed. The person you trusted betrayed you. The diagnosis arrived. The phone call came. The plan failed. In each of those moments, the pain was not only caused by what happened, the pain was caused by the destruction of certainty. The future you thought existed vanished, and your mind immediately started searching for explanations. Human beings are explanation-seeking creatures. We need narratives, we need causes, we need reasons. We need to believe events fit into some larger structure because randomness feels unbearable. That tendency appears everywhere. When something wonderful happens, we search for meaning. When something terrible happens, we search for meaning. When we cannot find meaning, we often create it, not because we are dishonest, not because we are irrational, but because the alternative is staring directly into uncertainty. And uncertainty can feel like standing at the edge of an endless cliff. If this question has ever kept you awake at night, if you have ever found yourself wondering whether anyone truly knows why we are here, leave your perspective below. Not because there is a correct answer waiting to be discovered in the comments, but because the experience itself is surprisingly common, far more common than most people admit. The strange thing is that many of the most intelligent people who have ever lived eventually arrived at the same uncomfortable realization. Human knowledge is powerful, but it has limits. Science can explain extraordinary things. Philosophy can illuminate profound questions. History can reveal patterns. Psychology can uncover hidden motivations. Yet, when we reach the deepest questions, something unexpected happens. The closer we move toward ultimate explanations, the more we encounter mystery. And many people react to that mystery in one of two ways. Some become convinced they have finally found certainty. Others become convinced certainty is impossible. But what if both reactions are attempts to escape the same discomfort? Consider a child asking questions. Why is the sky blue? Because of the atmosphere. Why does the atmosphere exist? Because of planetary formation. Why did the planet form? Because of gravity and matter. Why do gravity and matter exist? Eventually, every chain of explanation reaches a point where even the most sophisticated answer encounters another question. Most adults stop long before reaching that point because daily life provides endless distractions. Bills need to be paid. Children need to be raised. Deadlines need to be met. Groceries need to be purchased. The mystery remains hidden beneath routine, but every so often, usually during moments of crisis, grief, loneliness, or profound reflection, the question returns. Why is any of this here at all? And suddenly the comfortable assumptions that carried us through ordinary life feel less stable than before. What makes this especially fascinating is that the fear many people associate with difficult questions is often not fear of being wrong. It is fear of losing the framework that makes reality feel understandable. Imagine spending years constructing a map of the world. Every belief, every value, every assumption becomes part of that map. Then one day you discover a territory that the map cannot explain. The immediate reaction is rarely curiosity. The immediate reaction is usually anxiety. Because if one part of the map is incomplete, what else might be incomplete? This dynamic appears in every worldview. Religious people experience it. Non-religious people experience it. Philosophical people experience it. Scientific people experience it. Nobody is immune because the issue is not intelligence. The issue is psychology. Human beings are attached to coherence. We want reality to make sense. We want existence to fit together. We want our suffering to mean something. We want our victories to mean something. We want our lives to be part of a story larger than ourselves. The possibility that some questions may never receive final answers creates a tension many people spend their entire lives trying to escape. Yet there is another possibility that deserves attention. What if the value of these questions is not found in solving them? What if the value is found in what they reveal about us? Think about how people respond when their deepest assumptions are challenged. Some become defensive, some become curious, some become angry, some become fascinated. The question itself becomes a mirror. It reveals emotional needs, hidden fears, personal experiences and psychological attachments that would otherwise remain invisible. The conversation stops being about abstract philosophy and starts becoming about the human condition. Why do we need certainty? Why do we fear mystery? Why does ambiguity make us uncomfortable? Why do unanswered questions feel threatening? These may be even more important questions than the original one, because they expose something most people rarely notice. Much of human life is spent managing uncertainty. We pretend tomorrow is guaranteed even though it is not. We make plans despite knowing circumstances can change instantly. We trust people despite knowing disappointment is possible. We fall in love despite knowing heartbreak exists. We continue living despite uncertainty surrounding nearly everything that matters. And perhaps that is why this question feels so powerful. It forces us to confront a truth that extends far beyond religion, philosophy, or science. It forces us to confront the reality that certainty may be far rarer than we imagine. Yet before you conclude that this realization is depressing, consider something else. Some of the most meaningful experiences in life emerge precisely because certainty is absent. Courage exists because fear exists. Trust exists because betrayal is possible. Hope exists because outcomes are uncertain. Love exists because permanence is not guaranteed. The very things that give life emotional depth depend on uncertainty. Remove uncertainty completely, and many of the qualities we value most would disappear with it. That realization creates a new tension, one that becomes impossible to ignore once you see it. Maybe the problem is not that uncertainty exists. Maybe the problem is that we expect certainty where certainty was never promised. And if that possibility is true, then the question at the center of this discussion becomes even more unsettling than it first appeared. Because it no longer asks why reality exists. It asks why human beings feel such a powerful need for reality to be completely explainable. And that question leads somewhere far more personal than most people expect. It leads directly into the hidden fears, desires, and contradictions that shape how every one of us searches for meaning. The deeper you follow that path, the more difficult it becomes to tell whether you are investigating existence itself or investigating the architecture of your own mind. And that is where the most uncomfortable part of this journey begins. You are sitting alone in a room after everyone else has gone to sleep. The noise is gone. The notifications have stopped. The distractions have run out. There is nothing left to focus on except your own thoughts. At first, your mind wanders through ordinary concerns, things you need to do tomorrow, conversations you wish had gone differently, bills, responsibilities, regrets. Then, without warning, something shifts. A question enters your awareness that feels heavier than the others, not because it is new, but because you suddenly realize you have never truly answered it. You have only learned how to live around it. This is the moment many people spend years avoiding. Not intentionally, not consciously, but avoiding it nonetheless, because there is a difference between solving a problem and learning how to stop thinking about it. Most of us become experts at the second. We stay busy, we create routines, we pursue goals, we chase success, we seek relationships, we build identities. None of those things are inherently wrong. In fact, many are beautiful and meaningful. Yet sometimes they function as something else. Sometimes they become barriers placed between ourselves and the questions that make us uncomfortable. Consider how often people say they want truth. It sounds noble. It sounds admirable. It sounds courageous. But when truth threatens something emotionally important, the situation becomes more complicated. Imagine discovering that a belief you have carried for decades may be incomplete. Imagine realizing that a certainty you relied on was never as certain as you thought. The emotional reaction is rarely calm curiosity. The emotional reaction is often resistance. Not because people are irrational, but because beliefs are rarely just ideas. They are emotional structures. They provide stability. They create order. They help people navigate reality. Removing them can feel like removing part of the floor beneath your feet. This is why difficult questions are so powerful. They do not merely challenge information. They challenge identity. Think about a person who has spent years believing they understand how the world works. Then they encounter an experience that does not fit their explanation. Maybe it is a tragedy they cannot make sense of. Maybe it is an act of kindness they cannot explain. Maybe it is a personal transformation that violates everything they thought they knew about themselves. Suddenly, the map no longer matches the territory. And this is where something fascinating happens psychologically. Many people assume the greatest fear is discovering there is no answer. But often the greater fear is discovering that the answer may be more complex than they hoped. Complexity is exhausting. Ambiguity is frustrating. Human beings naturally gravitate towards simplicity because simplicity feels manageable. We prefer clear villains and heroes, clear causes and effects, clear explanations and conclusions. Yet reality repeatedly refuses to cooperate. Life is messy. Human beings are contradictory. Motives overlap. Outcomes surprise us. Good people suffer. Flawed people succeed. Effort is not always rewarded. Justice is not always immediate. The world consistently challenges our desire for neat explanations. If you have ever struggled with that tension, if you have ever felt frustrated by questions that seem impossible to resolve, share your perspective below. Some people find comfort in certainty, others find comfort in questioning. Most of us move back and forth between the two throughout our lives. What matters is recognizing how deeply these questions affect us emotionally, because beneath every philosophical debate, there is often a human story, a person trying to make sense of existence, a person trying to understand suffering, a person trying to find meaning in loss, a person trying to discover whether life has a purpose larger than survival. Those motivations matter. They matter because they reveal something often overlooked in discussions about belief and doubt. People rarely arrive at their conclusions through logic alone. Experience plays an enormous role. Imagine two individuals asking the same question. One grew up surrounded by security, stability, and trust. The other grew up surrounded by chaos, loss, and uncertainty. Even if both are equally intelligent, equally thoughtful, and equally sincere, their emotional relationship with the question may be completely different. Why? Because beliefs do not exist in isolation. They develop within lives. They develop within experiences. They develop within stories. This is one reason conversations about ultimate questions become so emotionally charged. Participants often think they are debating ideas when they are actually defending personal histories. The discussion becomes about more than arguments. It becomes about memories, pain, hope, fear, identity. The need to feel that the world makes sense. The need to believe suffering is not meaningless. The need to trust that existence itself is understandable. Yet there is another layer to this that many people never consider. What if our desire for certainty is not simply intellectual? What if it is biological? Human beings evolved in environments filled with danger and unpredictability. Survival often depended on identifying patterns, recognizing threats, predicting outcomes, finding order in chaos. The mind became a prediction machine. It constantly searches for explanations because explanations help reduce uncertainty. In practical situations, this ability is incredibly useful. But when applied to the largest questions imaginable, something strange happens. The same cognitive machinery that helps us navigate everyday life encounters mysteries potentially larger than itself. The mind seeks closure. The questions resist closure. The tension remains unresolved. This may explain why people often experience discomfort when confronting existential uncertainty. It feels like trying to solve a puzzle without knowing whether the puzzle has a solution. The brain keeps searching for completion. Completion never fully arrives. And yet, despite all of this, there are moments when uncertainty produces something remarkable. Think about standing beneath a sky filled with stars. Think about witnessing the birth of a child. Think about falling in love. Think about hearing music that affects you so deeply you cannot explain why. In those moments, mystery does not always feel threatening. Sometimes it feels profound. Sometimes it feels beautiful. Sometimes the inability to fully explain an experience becomes part of what makes the experience meaningful. This creates a contradiction at the heart of human nature. We seek certainty, yet we are often moved most deeply by things that transcend certainty. We want answers, yet some of our most important experiences cannot be reduced to simple explanations. We fear mystery, yet mystery is woven into many of the moments we cherish most. The deeper you examine this contradiction, the more difficult it becomes to ignore, because it suggests that the human relationship with uncertainty is not purely negative. Perhaps uncertainty is not merely an obstacle to overcome. Perhaps it is an environment within which meaning emerges. Consider your own life. The most significant decisions you have made were probably not made with complete certainty. Choosing a partner, starting a career, moving to a new place, pursuing a dream. None of these decisions come with guarantees. They require action despite incomplete knowledge. They require trust despite uncertainty. They require courage despite risk. In that sense, uncertainty is not the exception. It is the default condition of being human. And once you recognize that, a deeper question begins to emerge. If uncertainty is unavoidable, why do some questions disturb us more than others? Why can we tolerate uncertainty about tomorrow, but struggle with uncertainty about existence itself? The answer may have less to do with knowledge and more to do with control. We like to feel that reality is understandable because understanding creates the illusion of mastery. It creates the feeling that we know where we stand. When a question threatens that feeling, it touches something deeper than intellect. It touches vulnerability. It reminds us that there are aspects of reality we may never fully grasp. For some people, that realization feels terrifying. For others, it feels liberating. But regardless of how one reacts, it is difficult to escape the emotional force of the question, because eventually every person reaches moments where certainty fails, moments where explanations feel incomplete, moments where the usual answers no longer satisfy. And when those moments arrive, something extraordinary can happen. Instead of asking what the answer is, we begin asking why the question affects us so deeply. That shift changes everything. The focus moves away from proving something and toward understanding ourselves. It becomes less about winning an argument and more about examining the fears, hopes, and assumptions that shape our search for meaning. And once that process begins, a possibility emerges that many people never anticipate. the possibility that the most important discovery is not found at the end of the question, but in the transformation that occurs while wrestling with it. Because the longer you stay with the uncertainty, instead of running from it, the more it starts revealing things about you that certainty never could. And those revelations lead directly into the most uncomfortable realization of all, one that forces us to reconsider not only what we believe, but why we need certain beliefs in the first place. Imagine reaching the end of your life and realizing that the question which followed you for decades was never really about the universe. It was never really about existence. It was never really about philosophy. It was about you, about the way you responded to uncertainty, about the way you handled mystery, about the stories you told yourself when reality refused to provide complete explanations. This possibility is uncomfortable because it shifts the entire conversation. Suddenly the focus is no longer on finding the perfect answer. The focus becomes understanding the person searching for it. Most people spend their lives assuming that certainty creates strength. Yet when you look closely, some of the strongest individuals are not those who eliminated uncertainty. They are those who learned how to live with it. Think about the parent raising a child without knowing exactly how the future will unfold. Think about the entrepreneur risking failure. Think about the patient waiting for medical results. Think about the person rebuilding their life after loss. None of them possess certainty. Yet they continue moving forward. They continue making decisions. They continue finding reasons to hope. The strength comes not from having all the answers, but from acting despite the absence of them. This observation becomes even more interesting when applied to the deepest questions of existence, because eventually every worldview encounters a boundary, a point where explanation reaches its limit, a point where confidence gives way to mystery, a point where the honest response may simply be that we do not know. For some people, those words feel like defeat. They hear uncertainty and assume weakness. But what if acknowledging uncertainty requires more courage than pretending it does not exist? What if one of the most difficult things a human being can say is that they have reached the edge of their understanding? In a culture obsessed with certainty, confidence, and immediate answers, intellectual humility can feel surprisingly rare. Yet humility may be one of the most valuable responses available to us when confronting questions larger than ourselves. Not because humility solves the mystery, but because it allows us to engage with it honestly. Consider how often human history has been shaped by certainty. Entire movements, entire conflicts, entire generations have been influenced by people who believed they possessed final answers. Sometimes those answers produced extraordinary progress. Sometimes they produced devastating consequences. The common factor was not whether people were sincere. Most were. The common factor was confidence, the belief that the mystery had been fully resolved, the belief that uncertainty had been conquered. Yet history repeatedly teaches a different lesson. The deeper humanity explores reality, the more complexity appears. The closer we examine existence, the more layers we uncover. Every answer opens new questions. Every discovery reveals additional mysteries. This pattern appears so consistently that it becomes difficult to ignore. Perhaps the goal was never complete certainty. Perhaps the goal was learning how to navigate uncertainty without becoming consumed by it. This brings us back to the question that has quietly guided this entire journey. Try answering this without using faith. At first, the challenge seems directed outward. It seems like a test of arguments, ideas, and explanations. But now it begins to look different, because every person uses some form of faith in everyday life, even outside religious contexts. Not necessarily faith in a doctrine or belief system, but faith in assumptions they cannot completely verify. Faith that tomorrow will arrive. Faith that other minds exist beyond their own. Faith that reality is generally consistent. Faith that their memories are reasonably accurate. Faith that the future can be influenced by present actions. Human beings function through countless assumptions accepted long before absolute proof becomes available. This observation does not prove any particular worldview. It does not validate one philosophy over another. Instead, it reveals something about the structure of human experience itself. Complete certainty may be far less common than we imagine. Much of life operates within probabilities, trust, interpretation, and incomplete information. Once you recognize this, the conversation changes dramatically. The division between certainty and uncertainty becomes less clear. The boundary between knowledge and assumption becomes more complicated. The confidence with which people defend their conclusions begins to look less like evidence of certainty and more like evidence of emotional commitment. And this realization can be unsettling because it forces us to confront a possibility many people would rather avoid. The possibility that our deepest convictions are influenced not only by logic, evidence, and reasoning, but also by fear, hope, identity, experience, community, longing, and the desire for meaning. This does not mean those convictions are false. It means they are human. They emerge from lives, not merely arguments. They develop within emotional realities, not just intellectual frameworks. That insight becomes especially important when discussing questions that cannot be settled through simple demonstrations. Because the moment we forget our shared humanity, conversations become battles. Curiosity becomes tribalism. Reflection becomes confrontation. Understanding becomes secondary to victory. Yet the most meaningful discussions often occur when people stop trying to win and start trying to understand. Understanding does not require agreement. It requires honesty. It requires recognizing that every person is navigating the same mystery from a different position. Some approach it through science, some through philosophy, some through personal experience, some through spiritual reflection, some through skepticism, some through combinations of all of these. The paths differ, the questions remain, and perhaps that is why these questions continue surviving generation after generation. Not because they are impossible to answer, but because they touch something fundamental about being human. They force us to confront mortality, meaning, purpose, suffering, identity, hope. They reveal the limits of our knowledge and the depth of our curiosity. They expose the tension between our desire for certainty and the reality of mystery. If you have followed this journey this far, consider sharing your perspective below. Not your conclusion alone, but your experience with the question itself. Has uncertainty made you anxious, or has it made you curious? Has questioning strengthened your worldview or complicated it? The most interesting responses are often not the answers people reach, but the paths they took to get there. Because those paths reveal something important. They reveal that behind every argument stands a human being attempting to understand existence. And perhaps that is the realization that changes everything. Not that one side possesses all the answers. Not that one perspective eliminates every mystery, but that the search itself may carry value independent of the destination. The willingness to ask difficult questions, the courage to examine assumptions, the humility to acknowledge uncertainty, the openness to continue learning. These qualities matter regardless of where a person ultimately arrives. In the end, the question that seemed designed to trap us may reveal something entirely different. It may reveal that the deepest challenge is not answering without faith. The deepest challenge is examining what role faith, trust, uncertainty, doubt, and curiosity already play in every aspect of our lives. Because once that examination begins, the conversation stops being about proving something and starts becoming about understanding ourselves. And that understanding may be one of the few pursuits capable of remaining meaningful, even when certainty remains forever out of reach.